After years of being my family's ATM, I finally said enough. I kicked my brother and his wife out of my house, and now they're begging for mercy. Welcome to today's story. But before we begin, I'd love for you to subscribe to my channel so you never miss out on any of the amazing stories I share every day. Thank you so much for your support. Now, let's dive into today's story. Imagine a situation where someone you've always supported, someone you've sacrificed so much for, ends up taking advantage of you. What do you do when you finally hit your breaking point and have to stand up for yourself? Does this sound familiar to you? Have you ever found yourself in a situation like this? Stay tuned until the end to see how the character overcomes this difficult challenge. I've always been the backup plan, the person you can count on when things go south. But the world, they never saw me. Growing up, it felt like I was invisible, stuck in the shadow of my golden boy brother, Jake. He was the star, the center of attention, and I was the one who just existed. From the time I could remember, my parents made it clear. Jake was the one they cared about. He'd get whatever he wanted, no matter the cost. And I was always told to be patient or wait your turn. When I was 16, I was accepted into this prestigious science program, a dream I had worked so hard for. But when I asked my parents for the $500 fee, they said they couldn't afford it. A few weeks later, Jake got a $900 guitar. Not because he wanted to play, but because it was his dream. He used it twice before it was tossed into the corner of his room. That was just the beginning. Every achievement I had, every success, was met with the same response. "That's nice, honey. But did you hear Jake made the soccer team?" I got a full scholarship to a university, and my mom asked, "Is there a soccer program for Jake?" He didn't even apply for college, but somehow my parents managed to pay for his rent while he figured it out. Meanwhile, I worked 2 jobs to get myself through school, and no one ever acknowledged the struggle. I graduated at the top of my class, but at my graduation party, my parents didn't show up on time. Why? Jake had a soccer game, and that was more important than my moment. But that was fine, I was used to it by then. It was always the same story, no matter how much I did or how hard I worked. It seemed like Jake could do no wrong, and I was always the one left to pick up the pieces. I never complained, though. I just did what needed to be done, cleaning up after everyone, making sure things were taken care of. But as the years passed, I began to wonder, did anyone ever notice all the sacrifices I was making? Or was I just expected to do it all, as if it were my role in the family to always be the one to hold it all together? By the time I turned 26, I had finally saved enough for a down payment on my first home. It wasn't a mansion by any means, but it was mine. Every penny that went into it came from the sweat of my own brow. I didn't ask for help. I didn't need it. I had worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, while going to school full-time, making sure to never fall behind. There were countless late nights spent at my desk, working overtime, studying for exams, and sacrificing weekends with friends to keep my goals on track. My parents were happy for me, at least they pretended to be. They came to the key handover 15 minutes, tops, and then rushed off when Jake called. His car had broken down again. He needed a ride, of course. They promised to come back and check out the house, but that visit never came. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I didn't need their validation. But deep down it stung. I had worked so hard for this moment, and it felt like, once again, Jake's needs were more important than anything I had accomplished. Jake's latest disaster wasn't surprising. His car breaking down again was just another in a long line of problems he seemed to constantly get himself into. But this time, things felt different. It wasn't just a simple breakdown. No, this was part of a much larger pattern. Every time Jake hit a wall, whether it was a job loss or another failed relationship, my parents would swoop in to help. And me? Well, I was always the one left to pick up the emotional mess. Every time Jake lost a job, he had an excuse. It was always someone else's fault. The boss was unfair, the company was corrupt. Or, my personal favorite, I wasn't a good fit for the team. That was Jake's version of reality. But my parents, they'd always back him up, no questions asked. Every time he needed money for rent or a car repair, they'd open their wallets without hesitation. And me? I was the one quietly picking up the slack, working hard, making sure that everything in my life was running smoothly even when I didn't have the emotional support I so desperately needed. But none of this compared to what happened when Jake and his wife, Sarah, hit another rough patch. The truth is, Sarah's shopping addiction wasn't helping matters. While I was working overtime just to pay my bills, Sarah was racking up credit card debt buying designer bags and luxury items she couldn't afford. The irony wasn't lost on me. I couldn't even afford to go out to dinner most nights. But here they were, buying things they didn't need, living a lifestyle they couldn't sustain. I didn't say anything. I never did. Instead, I focused on making sure that I had my finances in order. I didn't want to end up like Jake, relying on other people for help. I didn't want to be like Sarah, chasing the next shiny object just to fill a void. So I worked harder. I put in extra hours. I saved every penny. I did everything I could to ensure that I wasn't going to be the one asking for help when things went south. But then one day, it all came crashing down. Jake called me. It was late in the evening and I was already exhausted from a long day at work. He told me that he and Sarah had gotten into a fight. He said they were struggling and that they needed money. Again, he didn't ask for much, just enough to cover their rent for the next month. They'd fallen behind on payments, and without the money, they'd be facing eviction. I didn't even hesitate. I just agreed. I didn't even question why Jake hadn't thought to call me sooner or why he hadn't tried to handle the situation himself. I was just so used to stepping in and fixing things for them. I didn't want them to have to face the consequences of their actions, so I sent them the money. The thing is, it wasn't the first time I'd done this. Over the years, I had given Jake and Sarah so much money it was almost laughable. Small loans here and there, paying off their bills, helping with car repairs, and even covering their grocery bills when they'd overspent. I kept track of it all, of course, because I knew they'd never repay me. But for some reason, I just couldn't bring myself to say no. Every time I did, there was a sense of guilt that would settle over me. My parents had always told me that family helps family. It was a mantra that had been drilled into me my whole life. And even though I knew it wasn't fair, I still bought into it. I still believed that I had to help, even if it meant sacrificing my own well-being. But then came the moment that would change everything. Jake and Sarah came to me once more, this time asking for money to cover a car they'd bought on a whim. They hadn't saved up for it. And of course, they couldn't afford the payments. This time though, I was done. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep letting them use me as their safety net while they went on living their reckless lives. I told them no. It was hard, but I did it. And just like that, the guilt trip started. Jake accused me of abandoning him, of being selfish. My parents called me a cold-hearted person, saying that I was tearing the family apart. But for the first time, I didn't give in. I held my ground. That was the moment I started to see the bigger picture. I realized that I had spent my entire life bending over backward for people who wouldn't even bat an eye when it came to returning the favor. Jake and Sarah's needs were always more important than mine, and my parents made it clear that I was just there to clean up their messes. But I wasn't going to be their backup anymore. I was done being the person who always picked up the pieces. I had built my life on my own, without anyone's help, and it was time for me to start protecting what I had worked so hard for. It was time to stop enabling them, to stop letting their poor choices dictate my happiness. But as much as I wanted to walk away, I knew it wasn't going to be easy. They wouldn't give up that easily, and neither would my parents. But I was ready for the fight, because for the first time in my life, I was doing something for me. I was no longer going to be the person who constantly put everyone else's needs before my own. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about my sense of self-worth, my emotional well-being, and my right to live my life on my terms. No more guilt, no more enabling, and no more sacrificing myself for people who didn't even see the effort I put in. When Sarah came into the picture, everything got worse. She was beautiful in that influencer way, with perfectly done makeup and a wardrobe that screamed Instagram. It was obvious she had cultivated this online persona of perfection. Her selfies were flawless. Every outfit seemed to be carefully curated, and her life looked like a highlight reel on a social media platform. But I didn't need to follow her posts to understand the kind of person she was. It was clear from day one. She acted like she was entitled to everything I had. It wasn't just the way she carried herself. No, it was the way she walked into my home and acted as if it were already hers. It started small at first. She'd make comments about my house, my furniture, my life. "This place is so cute, but I would have gone with something more modern," she'd say, casually flipping her hair. At first, I tried to bite my tongue. I figured maybe she was just being polite, or maybe she didn't know how her comments sounded. But as time passed, it became unbearable. Every little thing I'd worked so hard for seemed to be criticized, dissected, and judged by someone who didn't even know the first thing about the struggles it took to get here. Jake, as usual, never seemed to notice. Or maybe he just didn't care. As long as Sarah was happy, he was content to let her do whatever she wanted. After all, this was Sarah's world, and he was just living in it. Meanwhile, I was standing in the background, quietly seething at the way she belittled the life I had built for myself. The worst part wasn't the comments, those were annoying but manageable. No. The worst part was the constant feeling of invasion. It started innocently enough, with Sarah offering suggestions about the furniture arrangement. She was quick to point out that my coffee table clashed with the couch, or that the rug I'd chosen was a little too traditional for my otherwise modern apartment. She'd move things around without asking, claiming that it would look better this way. At first, I let it slide. I tried to tell myself she was just trying to help, that maybe I was being too sensitive. But with each little change, I started to feel more like a guest in my own home. I had worked so hard for this place. Every piece of furniture, every lamp, every picture frame was chosen carefully with my own vision in mind. But now Sarah had turned it into her own project. She took it upon herself to improve everything she saw, as if I wasn't capable of making decisions for myself. She'd say things like, "You should really get a bigger TV," or, "I think some new art would make this place pop." But it wasn't just about home decor. It was as if she was slowly trying to take over every part of my life that she could touch. It wasn't long before I realized that this wasn't just about furniture. Sarah's influence started to creep into other areas of my life. She'd comment on the way I dressed, suggesting I try on her clothes or telling me I should loosen up and stop wearing such serious outfits. She even offered to do my makeup, saying I deserved to look as flawless as her. It wasn't about genuine help. It was about control. She wanted me to look like her, think like her, be like her, because in her world, being the best version of yourself meant conforming to her standards. And if you didn't meet those standards, you were simply inferior. The situation escalated when Jake and Sarah decided they were going to move in. They said it would be just for a few months while they got back on their feet. Of course, I knew better. They'd said the same thing before when they stayed over for just a few days and ended up crashing at my place for weeks. But this time, the promise of a temporary stay felt even emptier. By the time they showed up with their entire life packed into boxes, I knew I'd made a huge mistake. It wasn't just a temporary stay. No, it was a full-on invasion. I'll never forget the first day they moved in. Sarah immediately took charge, moving my things around as if she were setting up her own apartment. She started with the living room, saying the space wasn't flowing, and began pushing my furniture around, completely disregarding the layout I had carefully designed. I could feel the frustration building up inside me. Every piece of furniture I'd chosen for its functionality and aesthetic now felt like it was just an afterthought to Sarah. Her way of doing things was the only right way, and my space was now nothing more than a canvas for her ideas. But it didn't stop there. Sarah's control over the house spread to every corner of my life. She started commenting on the way I organized my kitchen, the way I did my laundry, even the way I stacked my books on the shelf. "This is a mess," she would say. "You need to get more organized." I felt small, belittled, like everything I did was wrong. She would make subtle digs about how I wasn't living up to her expectations. "You should really try meal prepping," she'd suggest, as though my way of cooking wasn't good enough. Jake, as always, was passive. He'd smile and nod, saying things like, "Sarah's just trying to help. You know she means well." But that wasn't it. She wasn't helping, she was changing everything. She was turning my sanctuary, the one place I could call my own, into a mirror image of what she wanted. Every time I expressed frustration or tried to speak up, she'd quickly deflect it, making me feel guilty for feeling uncomfortable in my own home. "I'm just trying to make things better for you," she'd say with a fake smile. "You don't want to be stuck in the past, do you?" As time went on, it became clear that Sarah wasn't just controlling my space. She was slowly trying to control my life. The more I let her into my world, the more I felt like I was losing myself. She'd criticize my choices, my decisions, and my lifestyle, always with that sweet, manipulative smile on her face. "Why are you working so hard? You should relax more," she'd say. "Life's too short to be so serious all the time." But the truth was, I wasn't serious. I was focused. I was building something for myself, something that had meaning. But Sarah couldn't see that. In her eyes, everything I did had to be perfect, just like her. I began to realize something I'd been ignoring for far too long. Sarah wasn't just a roommate. She was a force that would stop at nothing to make me feel small so that she could feel big. And the worst part? Jake, the one person who should have had my back, was doing nothing. He just stood by and watched as she took over everything. Every time I tried to talk to him about how uncomfortable I was, he'd shrug it off, saying, "Sarah's just being Sarah. You know how she is." But it wasn't just her being herself. It was manipulation, pure and simple. And for the first time, I realized that if I didn't do something, I was going to lose everything I had worked so hard for. My home, my independence, my sense of self. Hey, are you finding the story interesting so far? If you are, make sure to subscribe to the channel so we can continue the adventure together. The best part is just ahead. 3 weeks after they moved in, I had had enough. It was like living in a pressure cooker, the heat slowly building until the lid finally blew off. I had spent the last few years building a life for myself, and every ounce of that life was being disrespected, stomped on, and ignored. They were disrespecting my boundaries, using my things without permission, and making my home unrecognizable. It wasn't just that they were taking over physically, though that was bad enough. It was the constant emotional drain that was the worst part. It started innocently enough. Or at least that's how it felt at first. Sarah's dog, who I never agreed to let in, ruined my plants, chewed on my furniture, and left a trail of destruction everywhere. I had spent years curating my space, carefully choosing every piece of furniture, every plant, every decorative item. But now my living room looked like a war zone. The cushions on the sofa were torn, the carpet had stains I couldn't scrub out, and the once vibrant plants I had so lovingly nurtured were now dead. Trampled by a dog that didn't belong here in the first place. Every time I tried to ask them to respect my space, I was met with eye rolls, dismissive comments, and that damn fake smile from Sarah. As though I were the unreasonable one. Jake, as usual, didn't help. Of course, he never did. He borrowed my car without asking again, and when I got it back, the front bumper had a dent the size of a grapefruit. He had the audacity to act surprised when I confronted him. "It's just a dent, relax," he said with a shrug. Like my car wasn't something I had worked hard to afford. My patience was wearing thin, but I told myself it wasn't worth fighting about. I was so used to this by now. So used to letting them walk all over me that I didn't even know how to react. But it wasn't just the mess. It wasn't just the dent in my car, the dog wrecking my plants, or the fact that they were slowly taking over my home. It was the constant emotional manipulation, the guilt trips, the way they tried to make me feel responsible for their failures. And that was the worst part. My parents were the masters of guilt. Every time something went wrong in Jake's life, they would call me, dragging me back into the mess. "Jake's car is broken again," my mom would say, her voice full of concern. "He'll lose his job if we don't help." And then, without missing a beat, she'd add, "Can you just cover the rent this time? Sarah's having a hard time with the baby. She can't handle all the stress." They knew exactly how to push my buttons. I didn't even have to be there for the manipulation to work. The guilt would creep in the moment I heard their voices. It wasn't just a request, it was an expectation. The implication was always there. If I didn't help, I wasn't a good daughter. I wasn't a good sister. I wasn't part of the family. And for years, I let that guilt control me. I gave them money I didn't have. I took on responsibilities that weren't mine. I bent over backward to make sure that they didn't face any consequences for their mistakes, no matter how much it cost me. But this time was different. I had already loaned them over $10,000 in the last 5 years. And not once, not a single time, had I ever seen a penny of it come back. They didn't even bother to make small gestures of appreciation. No thank you cards. No offers to pay me back. Not even a simple acknowledgement of how much I had sacrificed. It wasn't just the money, it was the principle. I had given them everything, and yet it was never enough. It wasn't even about the financial burden at this point, it was about the emotional toll. I was drained, exhausted, and empty. Then came the latest request, one that finally broke me. Jake and Sarah were planning their anniversary trip to Cancun. They'd been talking about it for weeks, posting about it on social media, building up all the excitement for what was supposed to be a much-needed vacation. I'd already been asked a few times to contribute, but this time they were serious. Can you help us out with the trip? Sarah asked, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness I had come to dread. We just need a little more to make it happen. You know, we've been through a lot. And we really need this. I could feel the familiar pressure building, the guilt starting to creep in. It wasn't even a question anymore, it was an assumption. They didn't ask if I could help, they expected it. And for a second, I almost gave in. I almost said yes. After all, it wasn't a huge amount, just a couple $1,000s. But then, something inside me snapped. I could feel the frustration, the resentment, all of it boiling to the surface. I wasn't their ATM. I wasn't their fallback. I wasn't a person they could just use until they ran out of options. So I said no. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I could feel the weight of my family's expectations crushing down on me. The fear of being labeled selfish and cold. But when I said it, I meant it. I can't do it, I said, my voice steady but my heart pounding. I'm sorry, but I can't help with this. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel bad. I felt relieved. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Like I had finally found the strength to set a boundary I should have set years ago. But it didn't stop there. The fallout was immediate. My mom didn't talk to me for 2 weeks. She sent me texts calling me selfish and cold-hearted, saying I was tearing the family apart. The guilt trip was in full force. How could you turn your back on family, she'd say. Jake needs help and you're just going to watch him struggle? But I didn't cave. I didn't apologize. I held firm, something I hadn't done in years. Eventually, I caved again. I gave in, but not because I wanted to. I gave in because my mom's guilt-tripping, Jake's pleas, and Sarah's manipulative behavior wore me down. I ended up paying for half of their vacation to Cancun even though I couldn't afford it. It didn't matter. I was always the one who had to give. The worst part? I didn't even get a thank you. Not once. I was always the one who had to pick up the pieces. But not anymore. One night, after a grueling 12-hour workday, I arrived home to find Sarah hosting a party in my living room. The stress of the day was already weighing heavily on me, and I had been looking forward to a quiet evening to unwind. Maybe catch up on some much-needed sleep or just relax with a book. Instead, I opened the door to the sound of laughter and loud chatter. The moment I stepped into the foyer, I could smell the faint scent of wine and perfume, an overwhelming combination of things I had never invited into my home. I stood frozen for a second just inside the door, processing what I was seeing. There were women I didn't recognize lounging on my couch, using my bathroom, and, to my absolute disbelief, going through my things. My personal, carefully curated belongings that I'd worked so hard to acquire. They were casually picking up my books from the shelves, rifling through the magazines on my coffee table, and even playing with my plants like they were some sort of display for their amusement. Sarah, seated comfortably on the arm of the couch, glanced up from her phone as though nothing unusual was happening. She offered me a bright, completely fake smile and then said, "You should join us. You look like you could really use the eye cream." It took everything I had not to explode right there in front of them. Her casual tone, the way she said it as if I were some object to be toyed with, it was the final straw. It wasn't just disrespectful. It was an invasion. An invasion of my space, my home, and most importantly, my dignity. For months, I had been tiptoeing around them, accommodating their needs, their demands, their behavior. I had been the punching bag for so long, bending to their every whim, but this time I wasn't going to take it. Couldn't. I had reached my limit. I stood there for a moment, staring at the scene in front of me, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear Sarah a new one for having the audacity to invite strangers into my home, for disregarding everything I had worked for. But instead of losing my temper, I made a decision. I walked upstairs in silence, my feet dragging slightly with the weight of the decision I was about to make. In my bedroom, I opened the drawer where I had hidden them, eviction papers. I had prepared them with the help of a lawyer months ago, after the first time they started overstepping boundaries. I had hoped it wouldn't come to this. I had hoped I could somehow find a way to make it work, to make them realize how wrong they were. But now I was done pretending. I took a deep breath, my hands slightly trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that was now coursing through my veins. I grabbed the papers, folded them neatly, and walked back downstairs. I didn't want to lose control. Didn't want to let the emotions that had been building inside me spill out, but I knew this was the moment. If I didn't take control now, I would lose myself completely. I tossed the papers on the table right in front of Jake and Sarah. My voice was steady, but there was a steel edge to it that surprised even me. "You have 30 days to leave," I said. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a declaration. Jake picked up the papers, his face turning an alarming shade of red. His eyes flicked between the eviction notice and me. And for a moment, he seemed to freeze. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, his voice rising with anger. His usual charm, the easygoing persona he wore like a shield, was gone. In that moment, I saw him for what he really was: entitled, irresponsible, and completely out of touch with reality. Sarah, on the other hand, immediately started crying. Her tears seemed so rehearsed, so utterly fake that I almost wanted to laugh. She pressed her hands to her face, her voice rising in protest. "This is so unfair. I'm pregnant. You can't do this to me. We're family." She sobbed dramatically, casting Jake a pleading look as though I were the villain in this story. But I had had enough. I wasn't buying the act anymore. For months, Sarah had been manipulating me with her tears, her sweet words, and her constant neediness. She had manipulated Jake into thinking I was the unreasonable one. She had played the victim card every single time things got tough. And each time I had backed down, giving in to their demands, trying to be the good sister, the good daughter. But no more. I felt a strange calm wash over me, as if I had stepped outside of myself and was watching the situation unfold. I had been their personal ATM, their punching bag, and their emotional dumping ground for far too long. They had taken advantage of me, of my generosity, of my kindness, until there was nothing left but resentment. It was time to put an end to it. For once, I wasn't going to feel guilty. For once, I wasn't going to be manipulated. "I've had enough of you two using me," I said, my voice unwavering, louder this time. "I've supported you both for years, and all I've gotten in return is disrespect. You've ruined my home, borrowed my things without asking, and taken more than I ever thought I could give. But no more." Sarah wiped at her eyes, but her expression remained cold and calculating. "You can't just kick us out," she said, still trying to twist the situation. "Where are we supposed to go? This is my home too. We don't have anywhere else to go. And you're going to throw us out when I'm pregnant." I didn't flinch. "That's not my problem anymore. You've had more than enough chances. I've given you everything, and you've done nothing but take." I paused, watching as the realization sank in. "It's time for you to leave." Jake stood there, frozen for a moment, before his frustration boiled over. "You're being ridiculous," he shouted. "You can't just throw us out. We're family." He pounded his fist on the table, and for a split second, I saw the anger in his eyes, but there was something else there too. Guilt, maybe. It didn't matter anymore. "I'm done being your backup," I said calmly. "You both have 30 days to figure it out. Get out." The silence in the room was deafening. Sarah was still sniffling, Jake still glaring at me, but I didn't budge. I had said what needed to be said, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my life again. They were no longer welcome in my home. And for the first time in a long while, I felt proud of myself. I wasn't the same person I used to be, the person who gave and asked for nothing in return. I was someone different now, someone stronger, someone who could say no and actually mean it. And I knew I was ready to reclaim my life. The fallout was immediate. It was as if the world had tilted and everything I had known to be true, everything I had accepted about family and sacrifice, suddenly felt wrong. My parents were furious, accusing me of destroying the family. The phone calls came one after the other, each one more loaded with disappointment and anger than the last. My mom, in particular, couldn't stop crying, each sob punctuated by the accusation that I had torn apart a pregnant woman's home. The words felt like a slap to the face. But I refused to let them make me feel guilty this time. "Your brother is struggling. Sarah needs support, she's pregnant, for God's sake. How could you do this?" My mom's voice cracked with emotion. But the words, as sharp as they were, no longer had the power to control me. For years, I had lived under the shadow of their guilt trips, under the weight of their expectations, and now, for the first time, I could breathe. I had finally done something for myself, something I had needed to do for so long. I stood firm. No amount of guilt could make me change my mind now. I changed the locks the next day. I called the police for backup, just in case. I wasn't about to let Sarah and Jake waltz back in and continue making a mess of my life. The papers were clear. The boundaries were set, and I wasn't going to let them cross them again. In the weeks that followed, the guilt trips didn't stop. The texts kept coming, the phone calls kept coming. Each one more desperate than the last. My mother sent me long, tear-filled messages about how I was ruining the family and how I had betrayed them. "How could you do this to your family?" she would ask, her words heavy with accusation. But I didn't care anymore. I had finally put myself first, and that feeling of standing my ground was indescribable. I had spent my whole life being the family's safety net, the one everyone could fall back on when things went wrong. But in the end, I had been the one who was left to pick up the pieces of my own shattered life. Now, for the first time, I was choosing to live for myself. And that was a freedom I couldn't begin to describe. A month later, things began to shift in ways I had never imagined. I had always been terrified of leaving my family behind. The thought of cutting ties with them, of moving on, had felt like I was abandoning them. But now I saw it differently. I was making space for myself, carving out a future where I wasn't burdened by their needs, their mistakes, and their manipulations. When the opportunity to move to London came along, I knew it was time. A new job, a promotion, and a relocation package were exactly the fresh start I needed. I packed my bags and left. Not just for a new city, but for a new life. As I boarded that plane, I felt like I was shedding an old skin, one that had been heavy with obligations and guilt, and stepping into a version of myself I had long suppressed. The first few weeks in London were a whirlwind. There were days when I felt overwhelmed by the excitement and the anxiety of starting over, but I quickly realized that the weight I had been carrying for so long was finally gone. There were no guilt trips, no demands, no one telling me what I owed them. I could go to work, explore the city, meet new people without the constant pressure to be everything for everyone. But of course, my family wasn't done yet. They tried to pull me back in. My mom called, her voice as familiar as it was manipulative. "Jake and Sarah have wrecked their financial situation," she said almost casually. "We need help with the bills. Can you just send a little money this time? You're the only one who can help us." I could hear the desperation in her voice, the same voice that had told me for years that I was the only one who could save them. But this time I was different. This time I wasn't going to let them drag me back into their chaos. I wasn't going to be the family's safety net anymore. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said, my voice firm, but with a calm I hadn't known I was capable of. "But I'm done being the family's safety net." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could feel the weight of her disappointment, the shock that I wasn't coming to the rescue this time. But for the first time, I felt nothing but relief. It was over. I was free. The days and weeks that followed in London were filled with new experiences. I started picking up hobbies I'd never had time for before. Photography, painting, hiking in the parks. I traveled to places I had only ever dreamed of seeing. I went to art galleries, tried food from countries I'd never heard of, and took weekend trips to the countryside to breathe in air that didn't carry the weight of guilt and obligation. And eventually, I met someone. It wasn't something I expected, but I was open to it. For the first time in years, I was in a relationship where I didn't have to prove myself, where I didn't have to sacrifice my needs to make someone else happy. This person treated me with respect, listened to me, and encouraged me to chase my dreams. It was a relationship based on mutual respect, not neediness or manipulation. I realized then that I had been living in the shadow of my family's expectations for so long that I had forgotten what it meant to live for myself. For years, I had been the family's cash cow, their emotional punching bag and their personal ATM. But now I was reclaiming my life, and for the first time in my life, I was truly free. No longer burdened by the constant demands of my family, no longer trapped in the cycle of guilt and manipulation. I was finally becoming the person I had always wanted to be. I had put myself first, and it had made all the difference. Today, I'm thriving. I'm finally living a life that is my own, not defined by the needs of others. I have the freedom to make my own choices, to say no when I need to, and to embrace the person I've become. The relief is indescribable. And as I sit in my apartment in London, I realize that I've come a long way. I may have lost my family, but I've gained myself. And that, I believe, is all I ever really needed. What do you think about today's story? I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings, so feel free to leave a comment below. Your feedback means a lot. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss out on the next exciting chapter. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. I'm so glad you joined me. and I can't wait to share more with you soon.